Companies spend over $100 billion on strategy consulting every year, and still up to 90% of strategies are not being fully executed. It begs the question of why? The thing is that over the last decades, we got really good at the separate parts of this process. We can create almost perfect strategic plan. We have tools like dashboards or tracing of the information for the implementation, and we even know about incentives and daily behaviors and their role in the execution. So where is the problem? Well, strategy is more like a living project rather than a one-off task. Even the most perfect assumptions and plans are just that. Assumptions, estimates. We can plan all the parts to the T, but who is taking care of connecting them into one cohesive piece? Where is the alignment of all those moving elements? And why is that even important? Well, most companies don't fail because they lack strategy or have a faulty plan. They fail because the strategy never fully translates into how decisions are made, how teams communicate, and what people actually do every day. And that gap between strategic intent and operational reality is what alignment is meant to solve. As you got from the title, this masterclass is about strategic alignment. What it actually means, why it fails, and where it really begins. So let's start with what is alignment? Alignment is a word that is used quite a lot. In the simplest form, it would mean everyone is on the same page. But by everyone, it not only means people, but the goals, plans, incentives, roles, systems, and structures. So, strategic alignment is the degree to which decisions, priorities, incentives, responsibilities, communication, and day-to-day actions all reinforce the same strategic direction. There are a lot of leaders out there who think that alignment exists if teams understand the strategy, people attended the meeting, objectives were communicated, and or everyone agreed with the direction at the meeting. But understanding strategy is not the same as being aligned around it. A company can have smart people, clear goals, strong motivation, regular meetings, and detailed plans. And despite all of that, still remain deeply misaligned operationally. Why? Because alignment happens on multiple levels simultaneously. And they do overlap with our three levels of the strategy execution right here. So, let's understand the three levels of alignment. The first level is directional alignment, which corresponds to the strategy design level. This is the easiest level. It answers the question, do people understand what we are trying to do and where we are trying to go? So this includes the goals, the priorities, strategic intent, company direction, hence the name. And most organizations stop here. They communicate the strategy and assume alignment and execution now magically exist. And I say it's the easiest and most up here, but apparently only on paper, because unfortunately data shows that even 95% of employees don't know the strategy. So the reality shows that most companies already are failing in here, and this is just the surface level. Let's check the second level. The second level is operational alignment, which corresponds to the implementation level. This is where strategy starts interacting with reality. Here, the question we need to answer becomes, do the actual systems, responsibilities, workflows, and decision structures support the strategy consistently? Because a company may say, innovation is our priority. But then the structure shows that approvals take weeks, teams cannot coordinate with each other, and incentives reward short-term output. Nobody owns cross-functional execution, and decisions stall between departments. At that point, the strategy, the innovation, and the reality are contradicting each other. And operational misalignment quietly slows everything down. This is where organizations often begin compensating with more meetings, more reporting, more communication, more and more tools. But this usually treats symptoms, not causes. And then the third level is the behavioral alignment, which corresponds to the day-to-day behavior level. This is the deepest and often most invisible layer. Because regardless of what strategy says, organizations always eventually default to habits, informal incentives, emotional safety, political realities, and pressure responses. This means people often follow the real operational rules of the organization, not the official ones. So, for example, a company may claim it values collaboration, but then internally reward individual performance and territorial ownership. Or leadership may encourage initiative and then punishing mistakes harshly under pressure. So, over time, teams adapt to what actually gets rewarded, protected, or punished, not what we say. And this creates hidden patterns that shape execution far more than strategy documents do. And this is why so many strategies fail. Not necessarily because the strategy itself was bad. Many strategies today are designed to be almost perfect. They fail because the organization was never truly aligned to support the strategy operationally and behaviorally in practice. So the strategy pointed in one direction, while systems, incentives, and behaviors pulled somewhere else. And because of that, despite carefully crafted plans, the execution has little chance of success to begin with. And that leads us to one of the most important distinctions organizations very often miss. There are actually two completely separate problems: creating strategy and aligning strategy. And they are not the same skill. Because creating strategy is about choosing direction, identifying opportunities, positioning, priorities, future vision, competitive advantage. This is what most consultancies deal with. And it clearly is important. If we don't know where we're going, how we can go, right? But as we already saw, you can have the perfect plan and not be able to execute it. And usually the biggest issue is lack of alignment between the plan and reality. And here alignment is about whether the organization itself can consistently move in that direction together. And this is where things become interesting, because most organizations assume or default to this assumption. Once the strategy is created, execution is mainly about discipline and following the plan. But in reality, many execution problems are already embedded inside the strategy design itself. Meaning, the breakdown often starts before the strategy execution even begins. So, for example, a strategy may depend on close collaboration between departments, without clarifying ownership between those teams. Or leadership may introduce multiple strategic priorities simultaneously without acknowledging the operational trade-offs this creates. Or a company may pursue speed and innovation while maintaining approval structures designed for risk minimization. So, in other words, the strategy may sound coherent conceptually while being nearly impossible to execute in reality. And once execution begins, those contradictions start appearing as delays, friction, bottlenecks, misalignment, confusion, shifting priorities, missed KPIs, recurring coordination breakdowns, and of course, way more. And organizations usually experience this as isolated operational problems, or they try to solve for them this way. But often they are symptoms of the deeper alignment failures already built on the system itself. And this is why many companies keep trying to fix execution without first diagnosing whether the organization was structurally aligned to support the strategy in the first place. So, until now, we have introduced the idea of strategic alignment, showed the difference between strategic alignment versus strategic creation, and the 3 levels of strategic execution with its alignment equivalents. But before we move on, let's visually clarify the differences to understand this concept really well. So again, for the strategy across 3 levels, we are looking at what exists. This is about, do we have the right pieces? So the 3 levels, which are strategy design, answers the question, what are we trying to achieve? Where do we play? How do we win? The second layer, implementation, answers the question, how do we translate this into plans, initiatives, KPIs? The third level, day-to-day execution. We answer question, what do people actually do every single day? This is structure. This part is static. Now the alignment across 3 levels answers how well these levels connect. This is about, do these pieces actually work together? Alignment means strategy translates correctly into plans. Plans translate into real work, and the daily work reflects the strategy. So we can see how all of that is connected together. This is the flow. It's the dynamic part, and it has to stay dynamic. So there are 2 very separate problems. Do we have the right strategy across all 3 levels? And second problem, are those levels actually aligned with each other? In this masterclass, we are dealing with the second problem, the alignment. Now, there is still one more point we need to highlight before moving into the meat of this masterclass. Why is strategic alignment so important? Why? Because misalignment quietly turns strong strategy into operational chaos. Teams begin pulling in different directions, priorities start competing, decisions slow down, ownership becomes unclear, and organizations gradually spend more energy coordinating work than actually moving forward. So, over time, even a carefully designed strategy starts losing its power in practice if the alignment is missing. Not because the vision was wrong, but because the organization itself is no longer aligned to support it consistently. And the result is growing operational friction. More confusion, more bottlenecks, more frustration, more effort, more loss of resources, without meaningful improvement in the outcomes. And this leads to another important reality. Strategy is often designed as if organizations operate in static conditions. But organizations are not static systems, and neither is the environment around them. As companies grow, different teams, different incentives, pressures, and priorities naturally begin evolving in different directions. And unless those layers are continuously realigned, small gaps between strategy and operational reality slowly compound over time. This is why alignment easily, naturally breaks, and why it's a not one-time exercise, but an ongoing process. So, now that we understand what alignment is, why it matters, why strategies fail, and why alignment naturally deteriorates over time. The next question becomes, how do we actually align these 3 levels in practice? Let's start with level 1. This is where it all begins. Without strategic design, you won't have strategy to execute. And it's also probably the most talked about element out there. There are plenty of frameworks, diagrams, tools, and consultancies to make it happen. And we mentioned many of them in our video about the first wave of solutions to the strategic execution gap. But you know what is interesting? We approach strategy design as this removed from reality process. It's like it's the assignment at university. You look at market and analyze the situation to craft this plan that will make you expend so much, but it feels like people forget it's not a one-off thing. And what do you mean? Well, first, let me give you my favorite thing, data. Sorry for people who hate it. 60+% say they struggle to connect strategy with day-to-day decisions. Data and leadership priorities are poorly aligned, up to 90%. Only about 2% of leaders think their organization will achieve 80 to 100% of its strategic objectives. And many of those statistics will be the basis for our leadership alignment in the extended version and in the future tools. But for now, do you see the pattern emerging from these 3 numbers? Leaders care about strategy. They give their time, energy, and company's resources to make it happen. Yet most think the strategy will not be fully executed, have trouble aligning it with leadership, and both with aligning the plan with reality. So it's almost as if the plans are being made in silos and then you try to fit them into your organization. That reinforces my point about the university assignments. You can create the most amazing plan, but it won't matter if you are not creating the plan for your company. Because how can you create and then try to implement a plan you know or expect can't be executed? What is the point of it then? Or how can you execute in the dynamic environment with a static plan? You can't. So here comes this realization that most treat strategy process like a static one of assignments, when in reality it's much closer to managing the project, which has the monitoring constant, risk management, time and space for things to go wrong and to adjust. So let's treat our strategy plan like a project. Strategy design phase would be equivalent to the first parts of the project management, yet most people jump straight into the planning phase while seemingly ignoring the most important part of successful project: initiation. I think the name may be misleading. Here, especially in the context of strategy execution, I call it understanding organizational reality. This is the step where you should understand what do you want to achieve. And that part most get. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. Now you also need to figure out what are you already doing, where are you going, what resources do you have, what is your capacity of those resources? Are the new goals extension of the current ones? Will you need to kill the current projects, pause them, can you finish them? What are the incentives and structures in place? Do you have right systems? Will the culture support the new goals, or will this need to change too? Look at this list. Do you see how you need to understand the whole organization, from systems and projects to incentives to culture, before even designing the strategy? Introducing a new strategy is a change. Sometimes small, other times huge, but change nonetheless. If you don't apply it in that context of what you already have, It could be the smartest goal ever and at the same time be useless in your system. And the sad reality is that this is what happens. Strategy is being created while ignoring organizational reality. And this is where the first huge misalignment resides. This is the point before designing the strategy, before the markets, which can break the execution and make implementation impossible. And most are not even aware it exists. The good news is you already are 2 steps ahead of most. You know it exists, you know why it matters, and now you are going to see how to correct it. So understanding organizational reality means understanding the current state of your business. It's a crucial step that provides so much information and forces you to challenge your assumptions and look at your business from angles that sometimes we rarely do. So now I will walk you through this process with 8 questions which you need to answer. And then, of course, depending on the circumstances, the size of your business, so you may be aware of those things yourself, or you may need to ask your employees for the information. Either way, it's something which, even if you don't deal with on day-to-day basis, I believe you should have some idea of when working on strategy. So, let's begin. Question 1. What do you want to achieve? This is basically the goal you want to create the strategy for. This is the tip of the iceberg thing we mentioned. Okay, now let's zoom out. Question 2. What is your company's vision? What is the thing you want to create with your company or organization? The ultimate goal for your business? Or what is the idea behind your organization? The long-term vision, the ideal you create strategies to reach. You know, the vision and mission statement most have somewhere in the back of their head. This is what you answer here. Question 3. Is your soon-to-be strategic goal aligned with the above vision? If not, why are you doing it? Did the big vision change? Or are you creating a strategy for things that are sounding great but not getting you closer to your main big goal? Okay, now that we reflected on the big vision, we can start zooming in into your business. Question 4. What strategies, initiatives, and goals are you currently working towards? Here, all the projects, recurring tasks with specific goals in mind, initiatives or incentives, all of that should be noted here. This is basically the what are your employees working towards right now section. And hopefully they are not working on tasks that are busy but meaningless in the long term, and we will come to this a bit later, but that they are working on actual projects and tasks that help your business get closer to the long-term strategy or vision which you circled back before. Question 5. What resources do you have available and what is the capacity of those resources? Here we are diving deeper. You can see how much money you have available for new initiatives and how much is being spent on the current projects. That's the obvious part. But resources don't only mean money, obviously. The most important resource is employees. And this is the point I want to highlight because I think it's crucial. Resource management should not only be about how many employees you have and whether they are motivated and productive, but actually knowing what is the capacity of your employees. What do I mean by that? For example, you have 100 employees, but every employee is already working overtime to fulfill the current initiatives and projects you have. So in theory, you have capacity of 100 employees. In reality, you have negative capacity and should already either kill some tasks or hire more people, but as it is, you have no capacity to introduce new strategic goals without making changes. This question is also requiring the assumptions to face reality. Because the tasks we think may take only 1 hour could in reality require 4 or a week. So assumptions on how much someone spends on something must be challenged here, and an understanding of what is actually happening. And maybe most importantly, this question requires leadership to understand what is happening in their business on day-to-day basis. And while they are probably on the top level not supposed to manage the day-to-day, they should still understand what is going on, even a rough idea. Because if you don't, how can you translate the big strategy to the actual daily work? And data shows this is a problem, and it will remain a problem, as long as the people creating the strategy don't understand both parts of the process. And this question and the following ones are helping with this. But also notice what is happening here. We are no longer designing strategy in abstraction. We are testing strategy against operational reality before execution even begins, before the creation of strategy even begins. Okay, question 6. Are the new goals an extension of the current ones? Are the new goals going to use the structures and knowledge and resources built or acquired in the previous projects? Or are they something completely new? Why is it important to know? Here we are understanding the level of change that the new goals should bring. If they are extensions, then the change should be less drastic and easier to implement. If they are not, then more change may be involved, meaning more change management processes must be taken into account. It forces us to again reflect on what have we been doing so far with our strategies. Were they actually leading us closer to the big vision, or were they something different? This is why this question is important to ask here. And it also leads us to the next questions. Question 7. Are the current projects, goals, and initiatives complete before you introduce the new strategy, or will you need to kill them to make space? This question requires you to look critically at what is currently happening, evaluate whether the current projects are getting you closer to your strategic vision. Do they need to be completed, or whether some things need to be adjusted? This is basically the prioritization. This is important task which should include what I call the sanity check of whether your current projects and initiatives are a priority or just urgent, or even worse, pure resource stealers. I get into details in the article, where distinguishing cool initiatives from the priority that pushes you towards the long-term strategic goals is something that more leaders should be aware of. And this question demands from you to ask yourself exactly that. Question 8. What are the current structures in place? What are the incentives? Do you have the right systems? Will the culture support the new goals, or will this need to change too? I group those questions all together because they require taking a holistic view of the organization, beyond just the organizational charts. You need to see how things currently work in practice. So, answering questions like, what behavior is being rewarded? What are the lived values? What is the culture like? What are the incentives? This requires looking at the systems and structures as they are in daily behavior, not what we preach in the company slides or what we assume or hope it is. There we go. While this list of questions is not exhaustive at all, I hope you can see already how much information that is not being thought of before creating strategy is included in those 8 questions. There will be many assumptions you would challenge here, and maybe even see reality for the first time beyond the dashboards and the "I thought." And if you answer these questions truthfully with real information, you will be forced to design a strategy that takes your reality into consideration, or to make the changes to allow you to create the strategy you wish to implement. Either way, it's going to be beneficial. And because of that, you are aligning plans with reality even before you sit down to design the strategy, making it so much more likely to be executed successfully. We have done the most important, although invisible step of strategy execution: understanding organizational reality before creating the strategy. And we aligned the assumptions to the specific situation of your business. Now we can get into the strategy design itself. But this isn't a class on how to draft a strategy, so we move on to the next point of misalignment, which is our core first level, the directional alignment. So let's quickly recap. Directional alignment means answering the question, do people understand where we are trying to go? This is the step where we take our created strategy and share it with employees. So in a way, we are getting into the third phase of the project management, that is launch, and into the second layer, which is implementation. Because after all, the employees are the one who needs to execute the strategy. And how can they execute it well when they don't know what they are doing? In this step, it's not enough to just say, this is our new strategy. It's important to communicate. 1. What is the big direction for the company? So again, recap the vision, which often is the public knowledge. Anyways. Question 2. What is this new strategy and how it connects to the big vision? 3. How does this strategy impact priorities? And 4. How does this strategy and priorities impact daily work? Now, you can probably notice we are tackling a few statistical issues we mentioned before in this one communication. So, first is the obvious. 95% of employees don't know the strategy and the point. Thanks to questions 1 and 2, they do now, clearly. This is something that can be provided from the top leadership without going into details of specific teams, but it's still giving a big clarification of, well, basically what the hell is going on. Now, question 3 is the mixed point, which could still be done on the top level with main priorities of the company, but it can also be, or should be as well, reinforced on the department or team levels with specific priorities for those groups. And then question 4 is something that is mostly done on the department or team levels, but it is still a crucial point which cannot be missed. It not only ties in the big strategy to the actual day-to-day work, but it also clearly shows why the work employees do matters. And we have enough data to know that this increases not only motivation, but also productivity, so the outcome. Therefore, it matters. And there is also an important psychological effect happening here. Most employees do not need to be deeply emotionally invested in the company vision to perform well. But they do need to understand where their work fits and why it matters. And this clarity gives people context. It helps them understand what the company is trying to achieve, how priorities have changed with this new strategy, and how their daily work contributes to the larger direction. And when people understand the purpose behind the work, execution becomes more focused, coordinated, and meaningful. So again, better outcomes. Such small details, yet such big result. All right, we have covered only two ways of aligning strategy on the first level of strategic design and alignment, yet we corrected so many issues and misalignments already. I want to go back to the two issues mentioned before: short-term versus long-term and urgent versus important. So in any business, there are, of course, two types of strategies: short and long-term. In the questions, in the 8 questions, and the materials overall, I focus more on the long term because I noticed that while in the process of creation or even some regular checks, we care about the long term strategy, in daily life, the short term often wins. And while it's important to have the balance, I fear there is no balance for many, and that short term strategies overtake the company's direction completely, making it flop around. And it's easy to get lost, especially with external influences. But I like to compare it to investing. Why do you invest money? You know it will take a long time. You know you need to put regular effort or money for it to bring substantial results. And you know the value of $1 now is higher than $1 in the future. But you do it anyway. Long-term strategy is similar. It does require effort and maybe sacrifices in the long term, but it's done for a reason. This is why I focus on highlighting the long-term strategies to kind of bring them back into focus, into the conversation, because I feel the short term is already overpowering it anyways. And the second thing is this urgent versus important. I already mentioned it and I dive more in the article, so I won't repeat myself too much, but I really want to highlight that it's hard to see once you're inside. That there can be a whole of resources. You can be so busy running towards something when you are only burning yourself and your team out running in place. So it's also useful to look at things from strategic perspective. Because if the initiative or project is not necessary to run the company, because there are tasks which simply can't be removed, as obsolete as they seem, but it also isn't aligned with neither short nor long-term strategy, then what are you doing? And unless there is a space and resources for innovation, which I'm a huge fan of that, but if it's not, then it's simply a waste of time and money. And there is a reason why teams spend months perfecting strategies, both short and long-term ones. This is supposed to be the well-designed way to achieve the organizational goals. It's the mechanism that helps companies make consistent decisions, prioritize correctly, and coordinate movement across complexity. And if we create strategies but don't follow them, why have strategies in the first place? This is the key realization. Execution problems often begin long before execution itself. They begin the moment strategy is designed without fully understanding the organization that is supposed to carry it out. And that invisible gap between strategic ambition and organizational reality is where misalignment starts compounding quietly inside the system. And now you can see it, and you know how to fix it. So, by this point, you should understand what strategic alignment actually is, why it matters, why strategy creation and strategic alignment are separate problems, why so many strategies fail, what are the 3 levels of strategy and alignment, and how the 3 levels of alignment work, why execution breakdowns often begin before implementation, how organizational reality shapes execution, and how to align strategy at the design level itself. That alone puts you ahead of most businesses, which are approaching execution today. Now, we intentionally skipped the full strategy creation process, partially because it's an entirely separate discipline and question 1, and partially because information about strategy design already is out there. But our levels 2 and 3, Implementation and behavioral alignments are quite different. These are the layers where strategy begins interacting with real life, with pressure, uncertainty, competing priorities, cross-functional coordination, collaboration, leadership behavior, and day-to-day operational reality. And this is where alignment becomes significantly harder to sustain. Why? Because designing alignment is one challenge. Maintaining alignment as organizations grow, move, priorities shift, teams expand, and complexity increases is another thing entirely. And that's what we will be tackling in the extended version.